Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel with my guest, Chris Cantwell. I'm your panel host, Kat O'Brien. I teach screenwriting at DePaul, and I know Chris from way back in the day when we went to USC Film School together. Chris, it is so awesome to have you here. Thank you so much. Chris is the showrunner from Halt and Catch Fire, Paper Girls, and fun fact, Chris is also a comic writer, including Dr. Doom and Iron Man for Marvel, among many other comics and many other imprints. Chris, thank you for being here with us. To start off, we would love to hear about the road that you took to get to where you are today. Like, I just want to come in hot. How did you navigate your writing career after film school, my friend?
Boy, I'll try to do the short version. One, I also do want to call out our awesome union, like for the writers, like the Writers Guild of America had a huge win yesterday, and the final agency, William Morris, signed an agreement with the union. So praise to awesome. Our president, David Goodman. Anyway, I guess I graduated in 2004 from USC Screenwriting, which is where you and I met, and we haven't seen each other in forever. We just talked about 15 years or something, which is insane. And then I had odd jobs after college. I was an assistant for 5-6 months to a horrible human being, and I quit. And then I went and tried to make like an indie micro budget feature in 2005 with some friends of mine from film school. We did that. And then I came back and, that movie went nowhere, but we, from the experience of that, I was able to start production coordinating commercials, and I did a documentary with a commercial company about the National Guard. During that time, I almost joined the circus. I almost joined the Coast Guard.
I remember the circus and the Coast Guard.
Yeah, I did some clowning training in there.
Yep.
And then I started making short films with some friends, putting them online. And right around that time, it was the dawn of YouTube. So YouTube was just an easier way to send stuff to your friends and family.
Right.
Where it was like, oh, it's just on this website. But then from there, we got acquired by a startup to do all of their online video content for social media for studios. And so we started with Warner Brothers, and then that startup I worked for got acquired by Disney. And then all of a sudden, by 2008 or 9, I was an executive at Disney. I was a creative director for social media marketing at Disney, which was very strange. And then
wait, can you pause and just say why that was so strange? Why was it so strange?
Well, because I started as a screenwriting major, and then I'm here like talking to brand management about like the Fab Five, meaning Mickey, Goofy, Donald, Minnie, and Pluto. So like, it's like Goofy can't ride one of the rides at Disneyland because he's a dog, but it's like, but Pluto's also a dog. So like, I don't understand. Goofy can talk. Anyway, it was a nightmare. Awesome. I did that for 3 years, but we also ended up hiring Chris Rogers. He was coming out of magazines when Condé Nast collapsed on the West Coast, and he had editorial and programming experience, which we needed for social media at that time. So we brought Chris on. We worked for a year together before we realized that we both were writers at that point. Like I was pretty much just focused on this. He was trying to kind of figure out his life. And then we decided to write a pilot together, and that got us a manager. And I had been like hip pocketed by an agent. I'm sure people know what hip pocketing means, but it means like they don't care about you, but you can tell people you're reps by them, but they will never return your calls or emails. So then our reps who were sort of interested in us said, write another pilot. We'll try to staff you guys. And the second thing we wrote was Halt and Catch Fire as a pilot. And so we had 3 meetings at HBO, Showtime, and AMC. And the first 2 were like, hey, cool script. Like, let us know what you're writing. And like, if any projects come up that you feel right for, we'll keep you in mind. And then AMC was like, from pretty much the beginning, was like, we want to make this show. But it took the whole year to get it kind of done and finished and sold, or at least acquired by them. And then we made Halt and Catch Fire. And then we did that for 4 seasons. Yeah.
So, all right. So in there, you also had some time where you were focused on feature screenwriting, right?
Yes. Yeah, so I was a feature guy in college. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you juggle like going between pilots and trying to pursue a TV writing track and then writing features?
Well, it was weird because I was really a feature guy, and it was Chris who came to me and said, and this was in 2010, that TV was really incredible at that moment, because I mean, there was Breaking Bad, there was Mad Men, there was things that I was just starting to catch on to and start watching TV, because I had not really watched TV since middle school. I missed all the high school stuff. So I missed like West Wing, I missed like
I was the same way.
Sopranos and all that stuff. So Chris gave me the Breaking Bad pilot and I read it. I was like, this is incredible, and just an amazing kind of art form to do like a first episode of something with that promise of something else, even though you don't really know what it is. So but we went, once we kind of were setting up Halt, and people saw that Halt and Catch Fire was going places, we started taking, we did what's called the couch tour, right? Where you sit on executives' couches and they give you bottled water and they talk to you. And a couple feature jobs came out of that. So we did a script for Sony. We did a script for Bad Robot, and we did a script we developed one of our own scripts for a small company called Indian Paintbrush. Yeah. And then we did like a spec job paired with the director that like was terrible. But most of those jobs were really intense. We had no leverage. We were young writers. We were paid barely anything. We knew that they were going to come in and bring in a heavy to rewrite us. It was really just about getting something down on the page. Right. But it was a good experience for Chris and I. I mean, it really was. I mean, you're in the lowest in the food chain at that point, like on the feature level. So you're doing a 2-step deal that takes like a year, right? So you're paid in 1 year, and then you're paid in the next year. And then you do a million drafts in between, which you're not supposed to do, but everybody does. Right, exactly. Because then they go, well, if this is the one you're turning in, then we're, we'll pay you, but then we're gonna move on. And you're like, well, I want to be the writer on it.
Yeah, and they leverage everyone that way.
Yes, and then we segued, but by the time we started making Halt, we were focused on Halt. Chris and I didn't really have any. We worked really hard for several months on a feature pitch for something that we really thought we were gonna land, and then we didn't, and then we were like, fuck. So it's like, I was very angry when we left the meeting on Warner Brothers. I was like screaming in the car, like what a waste of time it was, because we had to go back to the show, like the showrunner room. We had to go make the show, and so it was just this kind of diversionary thing that, So in terms of feature right now, we're not really involved. Chris does rewrites on features a lot, but he does it by himself. And I have one script that I've written but it's an indie that it's with people attached to try to make myself direct. So feature world is very strange.
Yeah, no, for sure it is. I feel like sometimes it can be helpful though to have this clout either in the TV world or in the feature world to kind of like leverage those against each other. So I'm wondering, did any of your successes in the feature space and kind of the reputation that you and Chris were building together kind of help tip the scale to being like, yes, we're going to give these guys a shot at Halt and Catch Fire? Or do you think it was that the material spoke for itself? Or how did that?
Yeah, we were very lucky in that. Chris and I sat down at a restaurant in LA called Cole's, which is downtown where I was living at the time in 2010. And we made a list of all of our contacts. And we were like, what's ideally the best thing that could come out of a partnership? And we said, well, maybe in 5 to 10 years, we'll be running our own cable series. And that was the first thing that happened, which was crazy. Right? But it's not like a Cinderella story, but like, don't forget the 8 years that came before that, where I was like almost joining the circus and stuff, and like couldn't find quarters to wash my clothes, so it was really the material. I think it was just right place, right time. AMC was kind of coming out of,
Mad Men.
The first two shows they made are 2 of the best shows in the history of television. The third one is the highest rated cable show in television. So they were like trying to figure out next steps. They had a couple things like hit and miss, but they were very much one of the only real players in the prestige market at that time, which was only 2011, right? Yeah. Like we weren't doing streaming Netflix yet. We weren't doing streaming Amazon. We weren't doing any of this stuff yet. So it was 3 places, and it was the material. And I think that, and then there was zeitgeist around it, just because we wrote it in the beginning of 2011, and then we went in and met with AMC about it in September. And in between those 2 times, Steve Jobs actually passed away in 2010. So there was a lot of like land grabbing around computer material. But what AMC liked was that this was an authentic story written about that kind of love of that industry before there was, the death of one of its giants pushing content forward. So
Well, it's interesting that you talk about the zeitgeist of it all and also the authentic nature of the storytelling, because I feel like, you know, we were kids when Halt and Catch Fire takes place, you and I. And right, so like, how did you get that authenticity for a period piece?
Well, I think it's something that's owed to everyone. I think one, from the get-go, I was able to draw from my father's experience working in computers during that time.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of sessions where we interviewed him, and then as the show got off the ground, we brought on the art director from Mad Men to be our production designer, Chris Brown. And so there was a lot of discussion around, it's 1983, we don't want to do, I love the 80s, we want to do real 80s, and especially if you go to some place in the middle of the country like Dallas or Texas, they're going to be wearing styles that are not cutting edge 1983 styles, right? They're going to be wearing stuff from their closet that's from 78, 79, same things with the cars. So you get the right, department heads, specifically in production design, and you get the right pilot director, and you go from there, and you just start to write to that, you know what I mean? Like it,
yeah.
And we had a lot of creative technical consultants on too. So like Dr. Carl Ledbetter, who, has reverse engineered a computer several times and is now a venture capitalist. He went through every script to make sure it was sound and correct.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I guess the thing, like, I see what you're saying about like how all of these different components and the collaborative nature of the writer's room kind of come together. But when we're thinking about like giving advice to up and coming writers and students, and a lot of times you hear people say like, write what you know, and here you wrote something phenomenal that was based not on something that like you had lived through, but on something that you nevertheless knew through your connection to your dad. How would you advise writers, who are trying to like break into the space now? Like, what should they be writing? How should they tap into that like authenticity with their own voice and POV, especially connected to the zeitgeist?
I think it should be, a given that you should write from personal experience. And then I think if you're disciplined enough, you find your personal experience appearing in any of your material, whether it's Halt and Catch Fire or Iron Man. You know what I mean? Like there's parts of you that will show up in your work, I think, and that's probably born out if that's where your desire to write comes from, in a kind of weird, very difficult way of expressing yourself.
Yeah.
Because you have trouble doing it in other ways that other people don't, which I feel like writers have. It's going to be there. I would also say, like, and this is true for comics too, but I just recently heard the advice of like, write the TV show you want to watch. Write the
great advice.
You want to read. Right? Like don't compromise for don't try to suss the market out. There's a lot of like glib screenwriting advice that goes on Twitter and stuff like that. Some of it seems more obvious to me than others, where it's like, throw it to the wind and write what you want. I mean, I think if people can look at it and go, we can never make this, but this person wrote something very original. There was a writer we brought on to Halt in season 1 named Jason Cahill, who started on ER. That was his first job. And then he went to write on The Sopranos. And the script that we read of his was a recent spec he'd written, and it was about lobster fishermen in New England, which was kind of where he grew up. So he had a lot of personal knowledge about that. It had nothing to do with computers, but we were like, this is such a great, authentic read where you're immediately invested, that we were very lucky to have him come on into the room,
And so that like translated because you were able to like pick up on that voice.
You feel it immediately if someone is, it's for real. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, totally.
If someone has something to say, you can feel it immediately. I can also feel it immediately if someone doesn't have something to say. I will say, I mean, it's at this point, I've read like hundreds of scripts where it's like, I know immediately when I'm like, this isn't, it's not cutting it, or it's coming from, I can definitely tell when it's coming from like a hollower place.
Yeah, I feel like that's really true. As a consultant myself, as a writer myself, as a professor, I feel like when we're trying to guide our students' development, or when I'm trying to work with clients on developing their projects, we're just always trying to like steer towards what is that truth that you're speaking to, and how can you personally speak to it, and why is it that you can speak to it? And it's validating to hear you say that, you know, when you're reading scripts, potentially for writers that you're going to bring on into your staff, that jumps out immediately to you.
Yes, I think voice is something that jumps out, and that's
conveying
of, like, even in stuff that's not maybe as polished as other scripts, right? You find the voice that feels very, you know, that feels unique. I think you gravitate to that person. You remember the writing, right? And so, and then, you know, when you get into the writer's room has to be, I believe that the writer's room has to be an extremely safe place for people to get really personal. And it's not like you're gonna like write those things verbatim into the show, but you're gonna get authenticity when you're breaking character, when you're breaking stories, when everybody feels safe enough to talk about the, you know, the time
their own personal experiences,
the time they almost died, or the, you know, the really intense hardships they went through, or how they feel about certain things in the world. I think like that's the good stuff in a writer's room.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, so when you're bringing writers in, you know, we know that there's a lot of different ways to sort of like break into TV writing, whether it's going like PA, writer's assistant, etc. Obviously, that was not really your path. What are some of the ways that your writers have broken into your writers' rooms? Like, how have you found them, and how have you been able to like bring them on?
The easy answer is, I mean, you know, we had a showrunner named John Lisco on the first 2 seasons of Halt. We kind of ran the show with him starting in season 2, and then he left for the last 2 seasons. But, you know, we're reading off of shortlists from agencies, but mostly the producers and the network / studio. What writers do they really like? What writers kind of really move the needle for them in terms of they love their voice, they love their material. So you're getting a really good selection.
And the writers coming from other shows, usually?
Yes. Like, yeah, exactly. It's like this person is technically available. Like producers will go and come to you and say, this writer's fantastic. I just heard they're available. You know, but then you've got to do your own like work and look in other places. You know, Glenn Mazzara runs, or I used to run, I think he still does, the diversity chair for the Writers Guild, right? So there's different culture groups and ethnic groups, and, you know, orientation groups, and all these different underrepresented voices that have formed these kind of alliances, and you can go to them and say, give me your top 3, you know, like who are you really excited about right now? So you can do that as well. And then it just comes down to like, you start to know a lot of different writers, and you don't get to work with all of them. So you're immediately going, oh, is this person available? Or maybe I can go get this godsend who's been in every room I've done. Or like, you know, you start to trust people. Certainly, you know, Paper Girls has one writer from Halt and Catch Fire on it. A woman named Lisa Albert, who started writing on Murphy Brown, and she's like, it's hard not to think of a writer's room without Lisa in it. They just become very valuable, you know, and they're in short supply. So in terms of the trajectories everyone had, I think every single person has had a different way in, you know, like I know one of our writers was a writer's assistant on Deadwood, you know, like one, I mean, the first writer's room Chris and I walked into was our own, and everybody else had more experience than us, which was funny. They were all coming from shows.
Yeah. I mean, how did that work? I mean, because I know you were like,
I don't even know.
All of a sudden.
Yeah, it was like, literally, I mean, it literally, it's funny to talk about Halt and Catch Fire, because at this point, it's almost like we got to be careful to make it not sound like our glory days in football, like in high school, you know, it's like, well, we were on Halt, but like, it was incredible. I mean, that experience was such a lightning. It was such lightning in a bottle, because, you know, we were creators, we were new, so they brought on a showrunner. There's a million ways that can go wrong. Yeah. It could just be terrible. The creators could be booted. The showrunner takes over the show, or the creators and the showrunner never get along. There's 2 writers room going, or whatever it is. And we got Jonathan Lisco, who's from Chicago, and he's one of the best mentors I've ever had in my life, in terms of not just how to be a good showrunner, but how to be a good human in the entertainment industry, and how to run a humane process for your writers.
I mean, that's legit.
The biggest lesson. And he came out of the John Wells kind of camp, you know, doing Southland. Yeah. And his first job was on NYPD Blue. You know, it's like he's just a good person. So when you get a good person, and then your non-writing EPs are good people who are really wonderful, right? Which was Grand Via, which was at the time Melissa Bernstein and Mark Johnson, who did Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
you surround yourself with good people, and then it works. It's fun, which it's supposed to be. It's not always fun.
Right. No, I mean, but that's so important because it really can be such a grueling professional environment. And if you don't have that protection in place of like good people working with good people, it kind of becomes like, why are we even here? So
I loved everybody on Halt and Catch Fire. I mean, you'd have your notes disagreements, you'd have your budgetary problems, you'd have your friction with actors, you'd have all the things that go with a TV show. But in the end, everyone was a good person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're having an off day, and like the Halt writers are people that I still keep in contact with. Like we have a thread on my phone that just says Halters, and it's the writers. It's the writers. And
so like the writers' room is
it's
still
the writers from season 3 and 4.
Yeah.
But then I still talk to John a lot, and Jason, and Davi Waller's out there. She went and did Miss America. She came off of that, and she was on the first 2 seasons of Halt. And Zach Whedon was in 3 of the writers' rooms of the 4 we did. So we're still in contact, but people are my friends. It's and like that.
Right.
I've seen how people might go, how is that possible? Because there's so many people out there where you're like, I wouldn't even want to talk to this person like by accident or like in any kind of social situation. It's like, this person is vile. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
and all of a
I
sudden
really
you're
do
like,
know what you mean.
I'm working with them.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
it's very much a no assholes policy, but the assholes definitely get through. But Halt, for some reason, it was like, I don't know why, it was perfect.
So on this no assholes policy, I feel like, is that how you get into this space where you can have this like really fun shorthand? I mean, I think we've been holding out on our guests long enough.
Yes.
Who is Morph? It's time to talk about Morph.
Yes, Morph. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I will say about...
Go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay, I'll go. I was gonna say, is it because of this like no asshole environment that you cultivate that fun lessons like the Morph lesson come through? Is that like kind of part of this culture?
When everybody feels comfortable, like that's what you want. That's what I want. Chris and I will pride ourselves at this point. Chris and I think run very humane room, which is not always true. I think drama rooms. I've never had experience in a comedy room. I know they're very different. And I think it can maybe be much more intense and cutthroat. And you're also there, you're being paid to be funny on a lot of the comedy rooms, I guess all comedy rooms. Drama rooms are some of the funniest people I've ever met, and they're not on the hook for being funny because we're supposed to be there for a dramatic series.
Right.
So, but you're laughing, we're usually laughing a lot through the writer's room. And so, yeah, we keep humane hours. We usually start from like 10:30 to 4 or 5, 6 at the late, if we're like really have to get something on the board according to the calendar. But we don't stay till like midnight. There's no titles in the room. We come in, it's just best idea wins, and everybody feels safe. No one's allowed to kind of just jump on top of someone else's pitch and say that's stupid.
That's really important.
Yeah, but and like hearty disagreement for us is fine as long as it's about the work, right? Like people will argue about Joe, you know what I mean, or like why Cameron wouldn't do that, you know what I mean, but if it's about the work, I encourage it, and people cool off and it's all good, but like that's really important. So I guess, is that
where all these like lessons, this shorthand comes from, is like this very safe,
I think these are probably
environment
things in you can see my screen got brighter because I'm looking at a white window, but I think these are typical for some rooms. I think a lot of these, for me, come from John Lisco, and then also were born out of the first few seasons of Halt. And like I said, we had senior writers, so they had a lot of these terms themselves. But okay, so mine though.
Yeah, I want to know.
Okay, so when you feel comfortable in a room, you get to share, you be yourself, right? And you can see from my office that I have lots of toys and action figures and Spider-Mans and all this stuff. So when I was a kid, there was X-Men the animated series, which I guess is coming back.
Yeah, it is. My kids are watching it.
Yeah. Oh, are they really?
Yeah.
Is it the same voice actors? I hope so.
I think it's the same series. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So it's X-Men the animated series. And it was great, like middle school cartoon. And in the first episode, I'm not going to spoil it, like, but in the first episode, there's a mutant named Morph who is like kind of the funny one and like glib one. And he gets killed. He gets killed by a sentinel brutally. And what he says right before he gets killed, and you can watch it on YouTube. Somebody has isolated this clip at the 45-second clip where they're getting out of a range of attack, and Morph says something like, he's like I told you, clear sailing from here on, or whatever. I remember it as clear sailing from here, but I think it's different. But and then right away, he gets shot by a sentinel and killed, which is great because he's like, we did it, guys, and then you're just dead. And so it's and then every episode subsequently on X-Men the animated series, they would start with previously on X-Men, and that would always be in there. It would be Morph saying, clear sailing from here, and then being shot and killed by a sentinel laser blast. Like, you know, like, and the juxtaposition of those two things was every episode, and I loved it. But the way we use it in the writer's room is it's such a telegraph if the character is feeling great.
Yeah.
I would say in drama, where it's like, where everything's fine. You know what I mean? Like when you get to that place of, and then they're friends and it's perfect. Like it begs for that to be destroyed. And like, and I think when we talk about a morph, it means that you're telegraphing to the audience that something terrible is going to happen to that person, right? Where it's like, we're doing it, man. You know, like, congratulations. You know,
you
like
feel it watching it too. You're just like,
you know, I had a great career as a cop. You know, thanks for this going away party, guys. And then just gunned down in the street as he's leaving. Like that's a morph to me, which is like it's just it's a telegraph, right? It's like you're telegraphing your punch.
How do you get past it? How do you help like your writers get past that telegraphing?
So that's a term that I didn't even write down, but when you said that, it immediately made me think of something we call kicking dirt over. So you kick some dirt over it. Yeah. And what that means is you kind of mess it up and make it where the person isn't perfectly happy, or it's kind of buried more in story, or you work on a way to have the thing that the shoe that drops to be surprising, right? So we always talk about like when something reads bald in a script, it's like there's a morph, or like, you know, like I know what's gonna happen. It's like we should kick dirt over that. We should kick a little dirt over that.
I love that term. That's so good. I'm stealing it. Thank you.
Kick dirt over it, and that helps make it feel more nuanced and realistic.
Yes. Yeah. That's brilliant. I love it. Are there other ones? Yeah. What are some of your other ones?
Okay, so we got. Well, speaking of kicking dirt over it, there's something that we call schmuck bait. So schmuck bait is when you're like, the character goes, well, I'm gonna leave this company even though I'm a main character and the show takes place at this company. You know what I mean? Where you're like,
yes.
Where it's like, you know,
right.
Oh my God, Spider-Man's dead. No, he's not. You know, like it's one of those things where it's like, what if? And Lisco was really funny about this because he would always take the pitch as far as it could go and be like, no, what if they do? What if they just leave the show in the middle? What if they never come back and they actually leave and we have to write a siloed story for that character? And I'm like, we're not gonna do that. But on principle, it's like anything that you kind of dangle is like, it's false stakes, right? False stakes is bait, right? Which is like, oh no, the puppy, you know, like it.
Right.
Where you know it's gonna be fine, like it's talking down to the audience.
So then to kind of like work around, you know, schmuck bait, no false stakes, heighten it, come up with real stakes, or what do you?
Make it a real thing that can actually happen in the show, as opposed if you know it's not going to happen in the show intellectually, and you're back
within that glass ceiling,
and like that's impossible. They're not going to do that,
right?
Either do it, which is very difficult if you can, or like make good on your threat and don't block, or figure out stakes that are authentic.
I love that. This is one of the things I think is so great about having professional writers communities, whether it's like a writer's room or just like keeping up with like all of your writer friends, you know, in different spaces, because as writers, we're always learning from each other, and these tricks that we kind of like figure out on our own. I delight in these. This is just like, I'm like, do you have any more before we go to
I've got a
audience questions? Okay,
so we have a 3-beat salad. A 3-beat salad is you have a C-level character, or say you have like John Bosworth in *Halt and Catch Fire*. or maybe another character that year. And you want to arc them, but you don't have enough real estate to do a ton.
Right.
So it's called a 3-beat salad. So throughout the episode, you start them on a trajectory, and then you interrupt that trajectory or change it, and then have them end up in a different place or headspace, at least a different headspace at the end of the episode. And that's called a 3-beat salad. Which, like, it's a nice 3-beat salad. Like, oh, Boz has got a nice 3-beat salad moving through this episode.
Yeah, I like that.
There's something called an up and back, which is something you also want to avoid, which is someone being like, off the top example, which is like, you know, I'm quitting. And then there's one scene where they're at a supermarket working as a grocery bagger, and then they're like, this also is terrible, and they come right back. Like, they reverse the story as if it's a story that didn't need to happen.
Instantly.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that involves like unneeded, there's another term called shoe leather, which is scenes where it's about logistics of getting someone from somewhere else to somewhere else, where it's like, oh God, that's a lot of shoe leather. In terms of like, she drives to Oregon, you know, it's like, look, we don't want to steer in the car and do it. That's shoe leather. It's like a, transitional scenes. Playing fair with the audience is kind of off schmuck bait, or like don't, not being fair with the audience is when someone reads a note and you don't read it. So the only thing that keeps the audience from not knowing what's going on is that the director and the cameraman did not show you the note that made the character go, right? And so we try to not do that. We try to play fair with the audience, right? Which is not like just hand of God hold things from them. You know what I mean? Because we want. Yeah. That's not a good enough reason. And then play it closed is like you hide something from the audience, or you play that open, like someone's internal struggle. That's like two different ways to tell some sort of story run. There's the icebox question, which I like. This is a Liscoism, which is where it's okay to have icebox questions. You just don't want them to be too strong. An icebox question is you tell the story and the viewer is emotionally engaged, but then they get up during the commercial break or afterwards and they go to get something out of their icebox, like a soda or beer or whatever. And in that moment they go, wouldn't that have taken them months to do that thing? And you want them to ask it into the icebox, not while they're watching the screen. So it's an icebox. Yeah. And it's like, so you can only get away with a few of those. And then I guess the one I'll hit at the end, because it's pretty good, is this is another John Lisco thing, which is an FTD. An FTD stands for a tap dance, which is things are happening in the show that it's not affecting the plot. You're just filling space. Like, for some reason, there's a miscommunication or misunderstanding that's not getting cleared up. Just, and it's really obvious, or it's just, nothing is moving forward. It's all kind of like false static drama, which is called a tap dance. I use that one. I
love these. Yeah. These are so fun.
Yes. Those are my big ones.
Awesome. Yeah. That's really great. I feel like I'm just gonna steal all of this and just make it my shorthand now in
it's giving so feedback. Not to talk in the shorthand in the room, because
it's so good.
Your shorthand, you can kind of move through it. Like I use something called an NLQ, which is also from Lisco, which is a non-loaded question. That's how, as a showrunner, I think we push things forward. I'll say a neutral question. So it's not I'm not leading you to an answer, right? It's like, do we really think Joe would do that? Right? And if the showrunner says it, it's like, oh, but do you not think, because that was my pick.
Right.
Like, it's a total NLQ, total neutral question.
Yeah.
Do we think, like, what is the discussion around that? And of course, some NLQs are actually LQs,
Right.
Like, no, that's what it's like. It's like NLQ, but why is this bad? Like, why did you write it that way? Like, that's not an NLQ. That's like,
yeah.
I have a strong opinion. Yeah.
So, all right. So, really quick follow up on the icebox, because it got me thinking about, challenging writers to come up with like what I call moments alone, and it's these moments where like we have a chance to kind of see the actor in their element. You give them that space to perform it out, whatever they're like feeling internally, and it gets externalized in some cinematic way. How do you handle those in your scripts and in the writer's room?
Private moments with characters. Those are you're really getting an insight to the character, or the character's a cipher and you don't want the audience to know what's happening. But it can be, I don't know, it plays with ambiguity. It's tough, right? Because you always want the story moving forward, but sometimes it's necessary to take a pause and just do kind of an insight moment or a moment of breathing, right? Like just a breath.
Yeah.
Like in Halt, I think in episode 9 of season 3, when we had I directed that episode, and we had Joe and Cameron dance, and we put a lot of the dancing in where they're dancing together. And some might argue that it's a tap dance, but it's kind of just a emotive moment of fun and beauty, and speaks to the characters' relationships if you've got the right actors who can do that. Or like, solitary moments, it's you're putting a lot on the actor, right? So you want to make sure that you're giving them everything they need in order to pull off something that is just them. But there are certain actors who you just want to watch them do whatever, and they're going to live.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, scene out, that's why scene outs are important, or how a scene is starting. If you start with a single character first, whose POV are you starting with in the scene? Is it someone behind a desk who's brooding, thinking about something else, and then the other person comes in, and then the plot begins. But the emotional inflection of that character is whatever happened before, and how they exit that scene. Who are we following out the door? Right. Are we staying with the person at the desk? All those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, those are some of my favorite things to kind of latch onto when I'm watching. That's
where the human story is, because we don't all wear our human stories on our sleeves. You know what I mean?
Right.
But some people do. But like that kind of hidden awkwardness or solitary moment is always fulfilling.
Yeah, for sure. So we have about 8 minutes until we're going to take questions from our audience. And one thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about that much yet is how writers' rooms are different now in COVID times. They're different from the before times. Now we are in the times, and I guess how might they change in the after times?
It's tough, and I mentioned this to you a little bit before we started, but we're in the Paper Girls room most of the first season in person, and then the pandemic started in March, and that was a pretty wild thing because it was a week or 4 days, I think, where I came in Monday morning to talk to Chris Rogers and our new partner on that series, Seth Folsom, who sold the original pitch. And I was like, we should the three of us need to talk about this thing that's going on, like this virus. And I was like, do we want to say anything to the room? Do we want to say, like, if you're not comfortable being here, it's okay. We can Skype you in or Zoom you in. And, we kind of arrived at like, well, let's just say like, we are acknowledging it. And if it's uncomfortable, we're not going to force you to come in. It's not going to affect your job or anything. But then the next day this seems pretty serious. Like, or even by the end of that day, it was like, oh, this is getting worse. And then it was like, we should try to get through the week. That was the next morning conversation. And then it was worse in the afternoon when we finished. And then it was, we should maybe stop at the end of this week. And then like we were actually deciding to, like, we'll probably not come in Monday. And then the next morning it was or by the end of Thursday, it was everybody get your stuff and don't leave anything behind because we're just all going home, which was real weird.
Yeah.
And like Chris Rogers got some of my stuff because I would take the train to work because I live an hour outside LA, and he has one of my work monitors, and it still has a post-it on it that says "Remember Umbrella," which is funny. And it's like, it was just so sudden and quick. So we finished season 1 of The Room like this in Zoom, but it was brand new, and everybody was in that like very weird upside down life mass trauma event crisis mode we were in, even though it's obviously gotten worse after, and everyone was like, who cares, like, let's go meet outside. But so it was, and we were trying to do the writer's room like we would do it in person. So it'd be like, let's do 4, 5, 6 hours on Zoom, and you want to die doing that. Like, it's just like the ions in your eyes are like killing your soul. So moving forward, we're going to implement some different changes in terms of how we would run a room on Zoom, which is we're trying to say less time on Zoom, but also in like offline time to think, and then supplement with tools like Slack or Miro, a whiteboard system that, I would usually be the one that would write on the whiteboard with Chris and I, and now even Chris, Steph, and I. So like now I control the Miro, and everybody can switch to it because they have that open as well as the Zoom windows, right? So it looks like our whiteboard, but it's online. So it's very strange. I'm sure some people will just run rooms like this and live where they want to after
I
all
mean,
this.
that's what I was going to ask next is like, do you see this kind of changing the landscape of like that sort of requirement of I have to live in or near Los Angeles to work in television?
Yeah, it probably will. I do think that it's not as good. I mean, I will say that it doesn't, you got to make sure that the quality control stays high, because
Sure.
there's something about being in person. It's a specific job. I mean, when you're working with people, like taking their visual cues and working off that energy or whatever it is, that in person is really powerful. But I will see, I mean, people don't need to go to each other's office for meetings to discuss like technical stuff. You know what I mean? Like it can pretty much happen anywhere now. So I think some people are realized and surprised by how much the tech will change everything from a convenience standpoint and not just a crisis standpoint in terms of when pandemics going on. So, but yeah, I mean, like being in person, like I was 4 hours of commuting a day that I did on trains and subways to get to work. I figured it out and I work on the train. But when I was in person, it's pretty awesome. I only drive 5 minutes now to my office and I do it like this. So it's nice to be with my kids and help my wife more. But that's kind of pros and cons, right? It's like but it's super easy to get distracted on a Zoom room. And my wife's a teacher, and you know, she has the Zoom room of kids she just did yesterday, and you weren't even none of them were talking, and like some of them turned their cameras off. Yeah, you know, or they just leave, and it's you can't control it. You can't be like, hey, I know, you know, like it's
totally different.
Yeah.
Do you feel like in terms of like staffing and picking up folks for your team, is that gonna be impacted by this virtual space?
No, I mean, I usually get submissions I always get submissions digitally from agencies and everybody else. I mean, like agencies will submit everybody under the sun that they represent, but
I mean, in terms of like making that kind of like chemistry connection when you like meet someone and you're like, okay, I want to bring you into our room.
We did hire someone recently over Zoom. I haven't met them in person, but I think Steph knew them in person beforehand. Okay. But I don't think it would be out of the realm of possibility to interview someone over Zoom and then bring them into the room.
The virtual room. Yeah.
It's like, if you can, it's the writing, it's the material. So an interview for the writers usually like a chemistry test to make sure they're not like, you know, gonna be insane in the room, or they're a complete asshole or a serial killer or something. Right. If you like the material, you shouldn't take the meeting if you don't like the material, because then you're gonna just put yourself in a terrible position when it comes to turning in episode scripts.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's really interesting about kind of like the chemistry of like connecting in person and also just in terms of like creating that safe space where everyone can talk, because I think like that's one of the biggest differences too. I think about that like in classroom spaces too, where, you know, breaking our stories that we're developing for like scripts, whether it's a first time writer or someone who's a more seasoned, you know, creative professional, and it just it's a different vibe, it's a different environment.
Try casting over Zoom. That's really, really, really weird.
What? Okay, really quick. What's like the weirdest thing? Weird, like best, worst, weirdest.
Well, I mean, everybody's safe, so that's probably the best thing. They're at home.
Okay, best. I think
do it the other way, but like, and then like, if you're casting actors that are going to work together, and they're just talking to each other on Zoom screens, it's weird. Yeah. Right? Chemistry reads does not mean what it means anymore, right? Like they're not in a room, and like you don't have a sense of the person's like whole physical self. You know what I mean? Like the actors always do the shots where they like the camera tilts up and doesn't be like, hi, I'm Mackenzie Davis and I'm 7'3", you know, like whatever. So like
right.
That's very strange. You know, department head meetings, like producer meetings, things like that. This is actually, it's better. I think we'll do more of these than we will phone calls. Yeah. Right. Conference calls are like, kill me. When people can jump on here, it's actually more productive than a conference call. I think this is way more productive than a conference call. But some of the other things, like, you know, writing, casting, post, which I haven't even really approached yet, like, it's going to be weird, you know? Yeah. It's strange. So, it's a new time.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to hear more, as you continue to navigate it. And I know that we have a lot of questions that are coming in about many of the things that we've talked about so far today. So you ready for audience questions, Chris? All right, let's do this. First up, we have Grace Banjic, who would like to ask a question live.
Right.
Oh, hi.
You ready, Grace?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Also, hi, Professor O'Brien.
Hi, Grace.
Okay, so my question is about comic writing. I'm a screenwriting student here at DePaul, but I'm also super interested in comic writing. So I wanted to know like how you got into that field and what you think are like the important differences between screenwriting and comic writing.
That's a great question. I think that, well, I mean, I got into it. I was able, like you were talking about leveraging features into TV or vice versa. Like I was able to leverage my television credits into comic book writing. I also was introduced to a very amazing editor in Kieran Berger, who created Vertigo in the 90s for DC. And again, it's about the people you work with, if they're good people and decent human beings. What I love about comic book writing is that it's a small feedback loop. It's usually just an email chain. So the process is really not affected by the pandemic. Obviously, for a while last summer, they stopped distributing books. So some titles were paused or frozen or canceled. In terms of the difference, I think comic book writing is very, very distilled, right? You're trying to do a story, but it has to be told in roughly about 5 panels of a page, sometimes more, nicer for the artist if less. The dialogue has to be kind of singular thoughts. How many balloons are you putting into a thing? Probably like the cap is usually 3. I'm more writing oriented, so I try to get away with more. And then you're doing passes on your comic book script once the art comes in, because you're looking at the image and wondering how much of what you wrote can fit into the image. I would say that the artist is your director. So you can give suggestions of where to put the camera, but when you're working with a really great artist, they're going to put the camera in a place you never expected.
That's awesome.
It really helps enhance the writing. Also, I will say, like, it's a smaller community, and everybody that I've worked with has been really, really wonderful. So it's been an amazing creative outlet for me that's less stressful. In a way that I've almost taken on too many comic book projects, because now I have too many comic books to write. I'm constantly writing when I'm not in the writer's room. But yeah, it really is that. It's like just studying the form. You know, there's techniques in a comic book that you don't use on TV, like a page turn. Like save a reveal for an even numbered page, because when you turn the page to that even numbered page, that's when the reader's going to get hit with some image, right? So you don't want to do page, because even a page turn happens on the even page usually, right? So you go from page 2 could be like a big splash reveal of, oh, something crazy, Iron Man is exploded, right? And then, you know, story on page 3. What sometimes gets weird is if you do a bunch of story on an even numbered page, and then an odd numbered page is a huge splash, because you know that the reader's eye is going to be distracted by the crazy piece of art that's over here on the other side. But you want them to read the story part first that's building up to that. So it's trying to save your splash reveals for a page turn, right? Or contain a scene in a page so that your scene doesn't run into the middle of the next page and then you break and move to a different location, because then the reader can get really disoriented. It's all kind of stuff like that. So it has its own set of rules, but they're both visual mediums. Yeah.
That's so fascinating. I love how you broke that down for us. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Grace.
Yeah, thanks, Grace.
Thank you so much.
Beth Coyle has a question that she would like to ask live. Hey, Beth.
Hi.
Hello.
I wanted to ask, how do you find the balance between writing something that you want to watch versus like something that would appeal to an audience?
Well, look, I mean, if you want to watch something that's not going to appeal to anybody else, you're probably not going to sell it. But like, go down playing your own music. Like, don't go like, well, I better turn out an NCIS like show. Like, you know, like if you want to write, you want to write what you want, not like just to do a job. Because trust me, if you're just lever pulling on a writing job, which I have done, it is brutal. Like, it is like, I want to die. Like, I don't want to do another page of this work. I don't feel any connection to it. Chris and I, me, Chris, separately, we've pitched and written a ton of stuff that people in the end say, no, we're not gonna pick it up. You know, I did a pilot for my comic book She Could Fly, and AMC passed on it. Chris and I did a mini room for a new show at AMC after Halt called Rainy Day People with a lot of the same Halt writers. And we did 5-6 scripts and they did not elect to pick up the show. So to answer your question, it's like, it's going to happen more times than not. You're going to write something and you'll be like, this is, and someone will say, this is what someone will say. It will say, this is so smart. This is such intelligent writing. We're not going to be able to make it. Basically, if someone tells you that something is really smart, it means that they think the barrier of entry for an audience member is too high. It's just a nice way of saying it. So it's really just taking shots and seeing what lands, you know?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Beth. I have a clarifying question that's come up. Chris, can you clarify what a mini room is for students on the call?
So
please?
They used to shoot pilots. You know, we shot the pilot for Halt and Catch Fire. I think if we, they don't do that as much anymore. They like to do this thing called a mini room, where instead of writing or shooting a pilot, which costs, you know, $6 million or something, they spend $600,000 and they put the showrunner or showrunners in a room with a certain amount of writers for 10 to 15 weeks. And they're there to generate a handful of scripts that would show where the story would go. Now, it's very tricky because you have no leverage in that position as a writer, because you're just trying to prove to them that this should still be a show. So you're constantly auditioning, even when you're doing a pitch out. You don't have a pickup. So as you get close to the end of that time period, every writer becomes aware that this could not become real, right? And it's not a great job to offer other writers because it's only 10 weeks or it's only 12 weeks, as opposed to a full series order where someone can come on for 40 weeks, right? And then go to set and produce their episode. So you're calling in a lot of favors to get writers you really want in there, because otherwise you're going to end up with people who are like, you know, taking a job because they need a job, right?
Right.
Mercenaries. So there's freedom in it where you can be like, it could be anything, but that's also like such a curse in writing where you're like, it could be anything. You have no idea who the actors are. You're not writing for e-voices. You know, we did this one writer's room, we wrote 5 episodes and we were like, who is going to play these people? We have no idea what this even looks like. We don't know where we would shoot this. And the network studio can tell you to change it as much as they want to, because it's just paper and there's nothing to hold them to account for, because they haven't shot anything. And you're not like, well, this is the guy that plays Joe, or like, this is what the show is, you know, like, and so I hate them. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds really intense.
I don't. I understand why they're in existence, and there are some pros, but
yeah, no, I mean, it kind of just goes back to a lot of the conversations that we've had earlier. Just, you know, we've been dancing around, you know, why the WGA is so important and why there's so much organizing around writers' rights, because it's really easy to exploit that process. Thank you for sharing about that, Chris. Yeah. Matt Rogers would like to ask a question live.
Right.
Hey, Chris. So as you pointed out, for newer writers, networks will bring in an experienced showrunner, like with you guys on Halt and Catch Fire. What did you learn from that showrunner on Halt that you wouldn't have learned / like maybe would have handled incorrectly if you were given that position from the first season?
Oh, I think I learned how to run a room right. You know what I mean? From somebody who's done it before. I think, you know, we're kind of, Chris and I came on as the experienced showrunners with Steph, because Steph is kind of the creator of Paper Girls, or at least the developer of the original comic book series in terms of its adaptation into TV. But it's someone who can teach you about amortization over pattern, you know what I mean? Like, and day out of days, and how many strips do we have? And we should lose some strips on this episode. What's our TRT? You know, like all these things where you start to go, oh, okay. And what I also learned, which you don't get with every showrunner, is you're there to support the vision of the show that has been created, right? So Lisco was very much about being transparent with us and wanting to help make the best version of Halt and Catch Fire that Chris and I wanted in terms of what the show story would be. I think, there's a playbook in terms of writing calendars and this and that, how to interface with department heads or your line producer, your UPM, the executives versus at the network versus the executives at the studio, the non-writing EPs. You watch someone facilitate all those relationships and you learn management. It's really what it is, right? And then you learn to foster good creativity, which is very important too. It's very much a workshop setting. So yeah, it all depends on the person too.
Yeah, that's great because it's challenging. When we're starting out in our writing careers, we're writing pilots, we're writing features, and not having the experience of like going into production with them, it's hard to really like understand the full scope of all those technicalities until you're like on set in that space.
Yeah, you're learning.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question, and William Kellogg would like to know, how does the writer's room decide on a season arc, and what is that process like?
Whew. I mean, well, this is what, okay, it's different answers for different shows. So what Chris and I did for Halt and Catch Fire is, starting with season 3, when we took over as showrunners, we would go out into the desert, the Joshua Tree. We would stay at like an Airbnb, and we would just talk about the story over the course of 3 days and read a bunch of research in terms of what we wanted to do. And then we would come out of that with kind of a rough document or sketch of where we would think things could go. And then we would kind of put that in every writer's hands the first day of the writer's room and say, this is the document to beat, right? If we end up being completely different from this, great. That's actually ideal. But this is the version of the show or this season to beat. This is the worst version of season 2. Now let's make it better. Let's change it. Let's find the better ideas. When it comes to a show like Paper Girls or Rainy Day People, which was our show at AMC that didn't go, you start with blue sky for the first few days, which can be kind of frustrating as a showrunner because you're like, what's the story? Like I'm on the hook for delivering this thing. Finding an endpoint for the season is good, where you're like, what are we aiming for? Like, what do we want to say about these characters ultimately at the end? What did we do last season that we can kind of evolve, And it's just a lot of talking and a lot of reading the assistant's notes, seeing what rises out, what people are gravitating towards with interest or emotion. And then it kind of just irons itself out until at a certain point, you're like, okay, well, we're going to start here. We're going to do some of this, then we're going to end here. And that kind of goes up on note cards on one corkboard that just says season. And at a certain point, you have to have the executives in for what's called a pitch out of the season. And that's where the showrunners pitch out what's going to happen in this season at a high level. And some of that burden can be shared by other writers who may be already assigned to episodes or whatever, like, hey, since you're writing 3, you're going to pitch out 3. And then the showrunner would close it. That's usually we do like a 2.5 hour, 3 hour pitch out, and it's a lot. Preparing for a pitch out is a lot, but again, you reserve the right to change it. We always say that, where it's like, this is the idea at the time. Like, of course, this is going to evolve and be iterative, but here's where we think we're going. Like with there's a character in Halt and Catch Fire where we didn't know. We were like, they're going to die. No, they're not going to die. They're going to die this season. Maybe they'll die this season. No, they shouldn't die this season. No. And then you see footage and you go, well, yeah, maybe it would be kind of great if they died, meaning that it would be emotional. And then you go back and forth with the room, and then finally you have to say, let's kill them. Whatever it is, like you just pull the trigger and go.
It's so dark. It's so
yeah, it's just like kill him. It's not like how to fight for the actor. It's like this is right for the story. It's like you have an idea of the end, but you don't know the end until you write it.
All right, I have a personal follow-up to that though. As a writer, and you obviously build relationships with your cast, does what's right for the actor, like as someone who becomes your friend, does that make it tricky to like really trust your gut on what's right for the story?
The hardest thing to do for writers, I think, is to interact with actors, because I feel like they're on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of their personalities and how they express themselves. I think the best thing I can say for actors, and the credit that is due to them is I can understand them being frustrated a lot because they are the most public facing version of the television series with the least amount of control of what it is. So I think that does explain a lot of like tough feelings and upset and frustration, whether it be on set or off.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's tricky. You give an actor a heads up and you talk them through that. I think, you know, there was one character on Halt and Catch Fire where we talked to the actor like at the beginning of the season, and he was also kind of on the same page. So I think that's the best version of it, where it's where it's like, this feels right, and you're like, yeah, that's kind of what we're planning on doing. You'll have plenty of conversations where you say, this is what we want to do, and they're like, that's stupid, or like, you know, my character would never do that, or I hate this change, and like whatever it is, you know, there's like a million things that can happen, but don't shut your actors out. I think that's a terrible thing to do, because then they will resent you. The more you can create, the less you can create a us versus them mentality between the writer's room and the set, the better, because you're obviously not going to be shooting it in Los Angeles unless it's a sitcom. So you have to be careful that, you know, a cabal doesn't form against you for no reason. You know what I mean? You're like, guys, I didn't know, or like, I can't believe you did this, you know, or like,
right.
I've had some spiteful moments where like I've dreamed of, like, I've gotten close to like, I'm going to issue a pink page where your character is killed in a combine, and then I'll take it back the next day and issue a yellow page where you're still alive. And I'm going to do that just to with you. Now, I'm glad I have a partner in Chris Rogers, because he's like, let's not do that.
Yeah.
That seems unnecessary. That seems like we'll be creating some unnecessary stress.
Oh my gosh.
But you could always do that. I think it'd be a fun move.
Yeah. That is such a good note to end on. I love that. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Everyone who's watching, to send Chris a thank you, show your appreciation, keep up with him. You can follow him on Twitter at @IfYouCan'tWell. And next up, our next panel is writing movies, writing TV, writing partners. Moderator Liz Hanna and Brian Milliken, starting at 1:30. Chris, thank you again. This was wonderful. Thank you to the tech team who helped us. Thanks for everyone who was watching.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.